Okay, so I have an amazing guest joining me today, Karen McMahon from Journey Beyond Divorce. And Karen specializes in high conflict divorce, and she works with both men and women. So she is in a really unique place to answer some of the burning questions that I know that you guys have about what women are thinking when they initiate a divorce. So, Karen, I'd love to start our conversation today with that kind of loaded question. What have you learned when a woman initiates a divorce, especially in a high conflict situation where there's maybe some accusations going on about abuse or narcissism? What's going on inside of her head?
Yeah. My experience has been most women, most individuals, but I'll talk about most women who ask for the divorce have been on a very long journey. They've been sitting on the fence for a long time. Whether or not they've communicated the problems, they feel that they've communicated the problems, they feel like they're not heard, they're not seen, they've lost hope. And they actually have to overcome this huge fear, the same fear that the men have. They have to overcome that in order to be able to say, I've decided. And so the presentation can be very triggered. It can be very sloppy. There's so many things that we can do wrong in those early stages because they're typically coming from operating out of their amygdala too. They're frightened of the uncertainty of the finances. If they've been the primary parent, they're scared of losing time with the kids. And one of the key things I've noticed is there tends to be this outward, like we have a problem and you're the problem.
Yes.
Right? And you're the problem and I need to leave you and then the problem will go away.
Okay. And that's definitely how a lot of the men I work with experience it, right? And sometimes it's very kind of concrete. Like she just told me that I've been a lousy husband and father for all of these years, and that she's been, suffering in silence for 20 years, or that she's never been happy. Like they're getting this very painful narrative around what happened in the marriage. And I think for a lot of the guys I talk to, they say, I feel like I don't even know this woman. Like she's a totally different person. But that makes a lot of sense if she's acting out of fear, because that is what fear does, right? It puts us in that fight or flight response where we're in that survival self and not really in our true self.
And that always never, that black and white is
Yes.
also very it's connected to being in your amygdala, right? It's like we lose the gray in between. So you've been married for a couple of decades, and here she's saying always. And the other thing is when you feel traumatized, and I'm not saying when you've been traumatized, so I'm saying it differently. When you feel traumatized, it's often hard to then remember the good times. Yeah. So if we've been struggling, and what couple doesn't struggle? You bring kids into the world, all of a sudden there's no time, there's no sex, there's not enough money, and it's really stressful. And so how a couple deals with that, if one feels traumatized, she could actually forget the good times and only remember that which supports the decision, the really hard decision that she has to make.
And Karen, can you help us understand how that decision arises? So, something that I hear again and again and again when I talk to men or I see in my YouTube community is they'll kind of list the things that they didn't do. They'll be like, I don't understand. And especially if you're saying she's also afraid of the financial uncertainty and the impact on the kids. Like if she's also worried about this, got to be something really big driving the decision. And so these guys are like, I didn't cheat. I wasn't physically abusive. I didn't lose all the money. I'm not a drunk. I didn't gamble. Like, it's kind of like the big five things that they didn't do.
Right.
How could she make such a huge decision? How could she push past that fear if there's none of those things in play? What's driving it?
Yeah. So, what's interesting is that's such a low bar, right? So if I don't drink, if I don't drug, if I don't cheat, if I don't hit you, what could the problem be? So that's a really low bar, and it makes sense because your men are in their amygdala, and so it's like, but I didn't do any of those really bad things, and so one of the key things I find, and I hope this helps, is to even ask, if we ask your listeners, how seen and heard have you felt in the relationship? Because it really comes down to, you're not hearing me. So I have a client whose wife left, and actually a big earner, and she is furious and angry, and he's my client, and and he was working so hard on building a foundation where they were going on beautiful trips, they lived in a beautiful home, they had good savings, and he was like, what? And she's like, you, I want you. The kids want you. You're not around. When you're around, you're not present. You're watching the ball game, you're mowing the lawn. Like, where is the connection? And so often I find that the women are feeling like, I've become the maid of the house. I don't have quality time with this person. I am the person to keep the house. I am the person to take care of the kids. And so what happens, and we can leave blame out of it completely, there's a division of labor. Life gets hard when you get married and have kids. There is no time, and often there's not enough money. So the division of labor has everyone going into their corner and doing their thing. And then the question becomes, how well are you at communicating? So one thing that happens is I'll have my females who are conflict averse. I told him, how did you tell him? Was he supposed to read your mind? You didn't want him to get mad at you. So instead of telling him, you acted like a martyr. So they're now, they're not doing this purposely, right? We're all just bringing our brokenness to our intimate relationships and doing our best. And so you may have a wife who really didn't articulate well, but there was passive aggressiveness. She grew up with passive aggressiveness, so she's passive aggressive. She thinks she's getting the point across. I read in a book once, Fierce Conversations, when you dump an emotional load with your message, right? Your anger, your hostility, your frustration, the receiver never hears the message. They receive the emotional load. And so a lot of times the men who are being told that their wife wants to leave, what you've been receiving for a while now isn't a clear message. It's been an emotional load that's left you feeling less than, right? Because they're so frustrated. Does that make sense?
Yes, I love the way you just described that, Karen, because that is, so many of the men I talk to are feeling so beaten down by the time she says, I want a divorce, because they've been receiving that criticism, that frustration, that unhappiness, and kind of that emotional blast for so long.
Yeah. And one of the things I do is it's so helpful to just explore, if you've been told by your spouse that they want a divorce and you're like, you feel sideswiped by an emotional 18-wheeler, like WTF, what the heck just happened? It's really helpful to go back and say, I have a couple of questions I ask. When was the last time you were truly happy in your marriage? How are the many ways that you feel loved and have been feeling loved by your spouse? Now, I don't want you to go back to 20 years ago. Like, we want to look at the last 5 years, maybe 8 years. You know, with COVID, maybe we'll go to 8 years because a couple of them were really hard. But what that does is it also helps many clients get out of the victim mode. It's like, you know what? Gosh, it hasn't been that bad. So that's always great. And then I'll say, I want you to tell me all of the ways that you feel deeply loved by your spouse. And you know what I get, Rachel? I'll get, well, she does the shopping and she cooks the meals, or he watches the kids if I want to go out with my friends, or he takes the garbage out. Like, this just really
Tasks,
it's like, okay. And then I just get very quiet. Anything else? Anything else? And then can I read that list back to you? And so what that does, for those who feel like the victim, it often begins to balance out. It's like, you know what? Something has been wrong. And I haven't heard it because she's been blaming and accusing me. But now that I just sit quiet and I start thinking about, how has the marriage been for me? What she's experiencing is often what he's experiencing, just in different ways. And that
Right.
helps.
And Karen, you're painting such a clear picture of how we get so, I think just because of life circumstances, so caught up in the roles, right? Like when you ask people, how do you feel loved? They describe, well, sometimes, she takes part of my role. She takes the pressure off, or he takes the pressure off my role. But we're really just starting to get segmented into our job in the marriage. And a lot of the men I talk to see it that way. They're so identified as the provider or the protector in their family. And they have this really deep-seated belief that if they play that role well enough, that's their job in the marriage. That's what the marriage is for. They're playing their part. She's supposed to play hers, and we're all going to be okay. But like you said, there's a low bar there because we can both be playing our roles really well, but never actually feel connected, never feel seen or heard or loved by the other person, because we're just out here trying to deal with life.
Right. It's like you're two friendly people living under the same roof and raising the kids, and another thing that's really valuable is what have we, me and my spouse, taught our children about intimate love?
Mhm.
And then it's like, do they see us hugging, kissing, squeezing shoulders, laughing together, rubbing each other's feet on, like what is the experience of intimate love? And I think for so many of us, we come from broken intimate love of our parents, and so we kind of do what we know. And PS, my client, his dad worked really hard and built a nice financial, and so he did the same. And he was so mad at himself because he was like, my intention, he had a heart attack, and then he doubled down on work to make sure they'd be okay. God forbid anything happened to him. And his wife was like, I want you. I want
Right.
time with you. And by the time he was like, oh, you want time with me? She was like, I am so done. I'm angry. I'm done. I hate you.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an important piece is if there have been messages, even poor messages, and they've been going on for a long time, you're just beginning the grieving process. Your spouse is saying, I want a divorce. She began that grieving process after the second, third, fourth, or fifth time that she asked for something, well or not well, but
Right.
thought she asked for something and then began to not get it. And then the other thing that happens is, and I know I did this, I was the one who asked to leave. I was in a very high conflict situation. And I had let myself go. So once I started deciding that this isn't working for me, I was scared to death. And so while I was in therapy trying to rebuild my self-esteem, I started working out, I started biking, I started losing weight, I started dressing differently. And that's a huge complaint, right? It's like, oh, now she's all hot and going out and with her girlfriends. And it's like, she is, if you could not take that personally, like that has nothing to do with the husband. That has to do with the individual saying, how do I rebuild my confidence and my self-esteem so that I can navigate this incredibly difficult transition?
Right. Which is what I see a lot of the men I work with doing as well, right? Turning to exercise, changes in diets, trying to get themselves back, and often coming to a healthier place than they were physically in the marriage. But Karen, I know one of the protests that we're getting, right, as some of the men are watching this, are then why can't she do that in the marriage? Why can't she get her confidence back in the marriage? Why can't we make these changes together as a couple in the marriage? And one of the arguments that I hear, again and again is that this is so bad for the kids, right? That a lot of them see, and I think there's just so many statistics out there about the impact of divorce on kids. And they're like, yeah, okay, maybe she's, not happy and she wants to build back her confidence, but she can do that with me. And then our kids aren't screwed for the rest of their lives. Could you speak a little bit to what you actually see the impact on children being?
Yeah. So I want to preface this with I specialize in high conflict. And so there's actually a TED talk. I'm forgetting the woman's name. I can send it to you. And she talks about how a researcher did a ton of research. It is not divorce that damages children, it's conflict. So in my arena, when somebody is raising kids in with the silent treatment and passive aggressiveness, or with hostility and fighting, that was my children constantly heard yelling and screaming and fighting and cussing, and conflict is significantly more damaging to children than going through divorce. And so one of the things to think about, if this resonates with you, the listener, is it's always better for children to have each parent under a separate roof, more emotionally regulated, more present, more capable of taking care of their needs, than have both of them under one roof where either one is broken and lost and diminished, or where there's just conflict and fighting going on. So that's the first thing I want to say. And then the second thing, I want to bring back that conversation about intimate love. What we grow up with, we go out and manifest. I can't tell you how many clients I've had who married somebody who had an affair on them. Either mom or dad had an affair, who married somebody who had an addictive personality and they came from addiction, who had conflict avoidance and they came from conflict avoidance. And so whatever your children have been experiencing, that is, you're teaching them this is what intimate love looks like. And they are going to unconsciously go out and find the same thing, which is why for me, breaking generational chains, like teaching people, how did you get to this place? Let's not blame you or say that you're bad. Let's look at what the root is. And then let's look at your fear for your children. Are those children learning a healthy example of intimate love? Because I'll tell you, my mom was heartbroken when I went through my divorce. I have children in their 20s. I get heartbroken when they go through heartbreak. You want to do what you can to break those generational chains, and so that your children can engage in healthy, intimate relationships. And so it's not all bad. I'm not saying it's all good. There's a lot of statistics out there, and a lot comes to bear. I would say that so many of my clients feel like more attentive and present parents in the divorce process and post-divorce than they would have been if they were kind of like unconsciously going about life with the two different job descriptions and what have you. So I don't want to paint the Pollyanna like it's great to have a kid go through a divorce. It's just also not necessarily, it can be better, and it doesn't have to be devastating. One healthy parent paying attention to, attending to, being present for that child can make a world of difference, even if the other parent is really disordered or difficult or dysfunctional.
Yeah, Karen, that's what I've seen too, that, I think the statistics reflect the fact that most divorces involve a lot of conflict, right? And so if it's conflict that's damaging to children and the parents are in so much conflict, but the men I work with, I see the same thing. When they're doing the inner work on themselves to deal with their emotions and step out of that conflict, they tell me, oh, I'm able to be more engaged with my kids. I'm spending less. And so often I hear, I'm not with them all the time every day, but the time that I'm with them, I'm so much more patient, compassionate, caring. And that is what children need. And
totally, quality over quantity is huge. Yeah.
Yes. What is the quality of emotional engagement, okay, in that time you're spending?
Yeah.
And I want to just highlight something that you just said, because I think it's so important for the men who are watching this in my audience to hear. is that so often the fear is what they're teaching their kids about giving up on a relationship. That now my children have learned that divorce is okay, that they can just give up and leave anytime things aren't easy or aren't good. And so I would really encourage anybody watching this, please go back and listen again to what Karen just said about how we unconsciously go out and seek intimate love in the way that we were taught it. And I think if any of you viewers go back to your own childhood and think about what your parents taught you about intimate love, and then look at how you've reenacted that in your life, and then take a step back and really ask yourself, what is it you want for your kids? Because I know when I've spoken to so many of you about this, your fear is that they're just going to give up on their relationship, and that they're not going to be these steady, committed partners. But I think what you really want for them is a more authentic, connected, healthy, sustainable relationship where they feel seen and heard and loved and are capable of giving and receiving those things. And Karen just spoke to that so well. So please go back and watch that part again. I think it's so essential especially if the big stress is about the impact of this on your children.
And I would say that in my own situation, this is a conversation I had when we divorced. When I moved out, finally, my kids were still only like 7 and 9. They were very young. And so conversations about what happened, and what does it mean, and what is intimate relationship was something that was very important for me to talk about, because we didn't talk about that in my family of origin. And so talking about and starting with young kids, even about what makes you like one friend and not like another. How do you want to be treated? What's a boundary? My ex spoke very nasty. And so I taught them about boundaries and respectful communication. And what does it feel like when someone loves you this way? And what does it feel like when someone loves you that way? And so as that present parent, there's nobody else, right? It's like just you and them under the roof. There is so much good that can come of that in inviting those conversations. And now my kids again are 25 and 28. My daughter had come to me and she said, I don't want to have any daddy issues. I don't want to like date my dad when I get older. And I said, just the fact that you're seeing the behaviors of dad that don't work well with you, and that you're saying that at 16 years old, like you're already so far ahead. And then she went out and she dated her dad. She was in a couple of verbally and physically abusive relationships. But because that dialogue had been happening, we were able to, so now she's in this uber healthy relationship. And she called me, she's like, oh my God, I'm in the healthiest relationship I've ever been in. And she's 25. And so there's so much that we can do in supporting our children, even as single parents. Hope is by no means lost. So if you're listening and you're thinking, we've just totally screwed the kids that we love so much, it absolutely doesn't have to be that way. You alone can set an intention and be a stand for a healthy, intimate relationship with your kids, and open to the communication that will help them connect the dots.
And there's so much hope there too, Karen, because it's not even that you have to be in a new intimate relationship and modeling it, just helping them become aware and ask the questions and recognize that, hey, like what you saw between me and your mom isn't how it has to be. We got stuck in this. I'm not fixed or healed or past it yet, but here's how I'm exploring it. And I'm asking myself these questions, and just helping them become more aware allows them to break those patterns too.
Yeah, and raising conscious children, there's something about trial and tribulation that moves us all to a higher level of consciousness. You either get stuck in victim mentality and you go no place, right? And you're just filled with judgment of the other, or you say, okay, what is my part? What can I do? And how do I move forward positive? And that is just brilliant for our children.
So Karen, we could, I think, hang out in this rabbit hole for a while. There's a lot more I'd like to ask you about your experience here. But there's another area we wanted to talk about today that I think is really important, especially because it's something I don't speak to very much on this channel, but that everyone who's watching needs to deal with. And that's the logistical side of divorce. And I think especially when you're blindsided, when you're not the partner that chose it, it happens all of a sudden. And then usually she's filing and she wants things to move.
Yeah.
And now not only do you have to deal with it emotionally, but you have to think about, do I get a lawyer? Do I not? And I often see men a couple of months into this who really don't understand the logistical process at all and maybe haven't taken steps to protect themselves because they're
Yes.
still so shocked that they need to protect themselves from this person. Could you speak a little bit to how you can support men and what kinds of things they need to actually be thinking about at those early stages?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is it's just one of the hardest messages to receive. And it comes with the mother load of emotion, right? Guilt, shame, regret, fear, uncertainty, anger, disappointment, like loneliness, heartache. I mean, so much. The first thing I want to say is if your wife is pushing you to move fast right after she's told you that, you set a solid boundary. No, I can't do that right now. I am drowning emotionally. I need time to get my head above water. A divorce will only move as fast as the slowest moving person. Now, I'm not suggesting you dig your heels in and stay stuck, but honoring that early stage of you've just been sideswiped by an emotional 18-wheeler. You're going to be in denial, depression, anger, bargaining. Your head and heart are going to be in a pinball machine going all over the place for a while. And it's really important to honor that. And I would say, the support that you're getting from Rachael. And then as soon as you can, as soon as you have that first thought of, I guess this is happening, right? Because that's the beginning of acceptance. It could be fleeting, it could be momentary, but it is the beginning. The first thing you want to do is find an attorney to get legal advice, not to hire and retain just yet. But what happens is your wife has most likely been thinking about this for a really long time. And what I think we should do is I should get the kids 70% of the time and you can have them every other weekend. And I want to keep the house. And you're like, what? And so she probably doesn't know her legal rights any more than you do. And so you just have fear speaking to fear, which is just a cocktail for disaster. So you take it upon yourself, find not just any attorney, a family law attorney, a matrimonial attorney who does this all week long. I would recommend you get a recommendation. And we, of course, could help with that. There's AVO, AVOO, I think is an online site where you can research attorneys. And what you want to do is schedule a consult and you want to list all of your questions. What's going to happen to me? What are my legal rights? What about the marital home? What about, it could be inheritance money or money I had before the marriage. What about the kids? What about custody? Am I really going to barely see my kids? You will get real answers. And that way you can stop listening to her because her story is a story of fear and a story of desire. It is not a story of truth. Unless she's a matrimonial attorney, what she is saying is irrelevant. What this person that you get advice from is going to give you some guardrails to know what is and isn't possible. They'll pre-qualify it 8 ways from Sunday because they're attorneys, but you'll have some guardrails for what's real. That's the most important thing to do because your monkey mind, on top of your heart going in all different directions, your monkey mind is spinning around trying to figure out something you couldn't possibly figure out. You don't have facts.
Yeah.
This gives you the facts, and then you can start considering what your options are. So I would say that is a really important thing to do early on, along with understanding the grieving process and being kind and gentle and compassionate with yourself as you go through it.
Yeah, Karen, you're speaking so clearly to just the physiologic response that happens with divorce, right? That there's really no avoiding that emotional chaos. And so knowing that, to give yourself the space and the time to say, I need to go through this. I need to help my nervous system recover from this blow, right? Instead of expecting yourself to just, move forward or really judging that.